You're standing in a grocery store aisle. You pick up a few normal things: milk, bread, eggs, some fruit. Nothing unusual. You walk to the checkout. The screen flashes the total, $63, and for a second, you pause. Because in your head, you were expecting something closer to $40. You didn't buy anything fancy. No steak, no alcohol, no snacks, just normal groceries. But somehow, every time you shop now, the total feels wrong. Then it happens again. You fill your car with gas. Another $70. Your rent increases. Your insurance goes up. Your streaming subscriptions renew. And slowly, a strange feeling starts to grow. You're not broke. You're earning more than you used to. But your money feels smaller, like it simply doesn't stretch the way it once did. And most people assume the answer is obvious: inflation. But something interesting has happened over the past decade. Even when inflation slows down, even when the headlines say prices are stabilizing, life still feels expensive. Almost like the financial system itself quietly changed the rules. Because what many people are experiencing right now is not just inflation. It's something deeper, something structural, a hidden shift in how money moves through the economy. To understand why everything feels expensive today, we have to go back to a simple idea: how money used to work. For most of the 20th century, the relationship between wages and prices followed a relatively stable pattern. Productivity increased. Companies made more goods. Workers earned more money. And prices rose slowly. The average worker could expect something simple. If you worked harder, gained experience, or moved up in your career, your income would grow, and your purchasing power would grow with it. This relationship formed the foundation of the middle class. In 1970, the average American household earned about $9,800 a year. The median home cost around $23,000, which meant a house cost roughly 2.3 times the average annual income. Today, the median home price in many developed economies sits around $400,000. While median household income is roughly $70,000, that's closer to 6 times income. In some cities, it's closer to 10. And this gap has quietly expanded across almost every category of life: housing, education, healthcare, childcare, insurance, even groceries. Prices didn't just increase, they accelerated faster than income. But here's where the story becomes more interesting. Because the reason is not simply greedy companies or temporary inflation spikes, it's the result of 3 powerful systems quietly reshaping the economy over the last 40 years. Let's start with the first one: asset inflation. When most people hear the word inflation, they think about everyday goods, food, gas, clothing. But economists often divide inflation into 2 very different categories: consumer price inflation and asset price inflation. Consumer inflation affects things we buy regularly: groceries, energy, services. Asset inflation affects things people invest in: homes, stocks, land. Over the last several decades, asset prices have grown dramatically faster than wages. In the early 1980s, the average home price in the United States was around $60,000. Today, it's several $100,000. Stock markets show the same pattern. In 1980, the S&P 500 index sat around 120. Today, it's thousands of points higher. These increases created enormous wealth, but primarily for people who already owned assets, which means the financial system gradually started rewarding ownership more than work. If you owned a home, your wealth grew. If you owned stocks, your wealth grew. But if your only income came from a paycheck, your progress depended entirely on wages. And wages did not grow nearly as fast. This created something economists call the asset gap: the distance between people who own appreciating assets and people who rely solely on income. Now let's look at the second force: monetary expansion. Since the global financial crisis of 2008, central banks around the world began injecting massive amounts of liquidity into the financial system. Interest rates were pushed extremely low, sometimes close to zero, and trillions of dollars were created through policies like quantitative easing. The goal was simple: stimulate economic growth, encourage borrowing, prevent recession, and in many ways it worked. Markets stabilized, businesses recovered. But this flood of liquidity had an important side effect. When money becomes easier to borrow, asset prices tend to rise. Cheap credit allows investors to buy more homes, more stocks, more real estate, which pushes prices higher. Over time, this creates a strange situation. Assets grow more expensive, even if the real economy grows slowly. And this is exactly what happened. Between 2009 and 2021, global stock markets experienced one of the longest bull runs in history. Real estate values surged, but wages increased far more gradually, which means many people watched wealth grow around them without fully participating in it. Now we arrive at the third force, the rising cost of modern life, because today's economy requires far more spending just to maintain a normal lifestyle. Think about what life required in 1980. A house, a car, basic utilities, food. That was the core financial structure for most households. But modern life quietly added dozens of new recurring expenses. Internet, smartphones, streaming subscriptions, software services, digital tools, childcare costs, health insurance premiums, education expenses. None of these costs seem extreme individually, but together they form something economists call expense layering, a gradual stacking of recurring payments, small monthly costs that accumulate into significant financial pressure. A few decades ago, a household might have had 5 or 6 major monthly expenses. Today it's common to have 20 or more, each one quietly drawing money from the same paycheck. And here's where the math becomes revealing. Imagine someone earning $60,000 per year. After taxes, that might leave roughly $3,800 per month. Now, subtract rent, $1,800, car payment, $450, insurance, $200, groceries, $500, utilities, $250, phone and internet, $150, subscriptions, $100, gas, $200, student loan payment, $300. Suddenly, the available margin disappears. Not because the person is irresponsible, but because the structure of modern expenses consumes most of the income, which leads to the strange feeling many people describe today. They are earning more than they used to, but they feel financially tighter, because income growth has been slower than the combined rise of assets and expenses. But numbers alone don't explain everything. There is also a psychological layer to this problem. Humans evaluate money relatively, not absolutely. In other words, we don't just measure our finances based on numbers, we measure them based on expectations. If groceries used to cost $80 and now cost $120, it feels expensive, even if your income increased slightly, because your brain compares present prices to past experiences. This psychological effect is called reference pricing. Our minds store old price anchors, and when reality moves beyond those anchors, we experience financial discomfort. This is why older generations often talk about prices from decades ago. Gas for $1, coffee for 50 cents, a house for $70,000. Those numbers become mental benchmarks, but the economy rarely moves backward. Prices adjust upward over time. And when wages fail to keep pace, the gap becomes emotionally noticeable, which brings us to one of the most important frameworks in modern finance. Something economists sometimes call the cost of participation. In earlier generations, basic participation in the economy required fewer financial commitments. Today, participation itself is expensive. Want to apply for jobs? You need internet access, a smartphone, often a computer. Want reliable transportation? Cars have become more advanced, more expensive. Insurance requirements increased, maintenance costs increased. Want to raise children? Childcare costs in many countries rival mortgage payments. Even education has transformed. College tuition in the United States has increased more than 3 times faster than inflation since the 1970s, which means the starting line for financial stability has moved. Each generation must spend more just to reach the same economic position. But here is the deeper insight behind why everything feels expensive. The system has gradually shifted from an income economy to an ownership economy. An income economy rewards labour. You work, you earn, your lifestyle improves. An ownership economy rewards capital. Assets grow. Investments compound. Ownership becomes the primary engine of wealth. And once this shift occurs, people who only rely on wages begin to feel financial pressure, not because they are failing, but because the system now favours a different strategy. This is why financial advisors often repeat a phrase that sounds simple, but carries enormous implications. Your income makes you money, but your assets build wealth. If someone invests consistently in assets that appreciate over time, real estate, index funds, businesses, their financial position gradually strengthens because their money begins generating more money without additional labour. But if someone relies only on income, their financial progress remains tied to raises and promotions, which typically grow slower than asset values. This doesn't mean the system is impossible, but it does explain the emotional experience many people share. They feel like they are running harder just to stay in the same place. And in many ways, they are. Because the financial landscape shifted quietly, gradually, over decades, until suddenly the cost of ordinary life felt heavier. But once you see the structure behind the system, something important changes, because the goal is no longer simply earning more money. The goal becomes positioning yourself within the parts of the system that grow faster than inflation, owning assets, building investments, allowing time and compounding to work. And this perspective leads to one final realization. When people say everything feels expensive today, they are not imagining it, but the deeper truth is not just about prices rising, it's about the rules of money evolving. The modern economy rewards different behaviours than the one our parents grew up in. And once you understand that shift, the feeling of confusion starts to disappear, because what once looked like random financial pressure begins to reveal itself as a pattern, a system. And systems, once understood, can be navigated, even if they quietly change the game.